Amen. Awesome. All right, you may be seated, and so glad you're worshiping with us today. And I'm kind of taking things today maybe a little earlier than normal, and there's a reason for that, as you're going to hear about here in a little bit. But there was a phrase that we just sang in that song that I just want to bring to your attention. I want us to look at it for a moment, because honestly, I think for a few of you, I think maybe for some of you, you could look at this and it could kind of rub you the wrong way. It may depend on what season of life you're in. It may depend on what's going on with you right now. But it's this phrase right here that we just sang, in the waiting, the same God who's never late. He's working all things out. He's working all things out. And I just think for some of us, when you're reading that, it takes an incredible amount of faith to actually sing that, maybe to even say that. First of all, because for some of you, well, for all of us, we don't like waiting. In the waiting. Sometimes when you're in the wait, it feels like God doesn't care. That's how it feels. And so we don't really like the waiting, because when you're in the wait and nothing seems to be happening and you're going, where are you, God? The waiting is what we struggle with so deeply. And then for it to go on and say, the same God who's never late. He's never late. And by the way, if someone could shut the door in the back corner of the worship center, that'll help me. That's even distracting me. I can only imagine for some of you sitting back there. Sorry about that. It's just kind of loud. So yeah, in the waiting, the same God who's never late. How many of you would say there have been times in your life when it felt like God was late? If you just were being totally honest, you know? God, you didn't answer in the way that I was praying that you would answer. God, you didn't respond the way I thought you would respond. God, you didn't show up when I thought you were going to show up. I would imagine for a lot of us, there are times when it feels like God is late. He's definitely not on our time, so it felt late. And then this last phrase, let's put it back up there real quick. The last phrase, that he's working all things out. I mean, how many times have you felt like, God, where are you? What are you doing? It doesn't seem like you're working right now, especially working it all out. It seems like it's not working out at all. And so I think there's moments when it doesn't feel like God's working it out, and it definitely feels like God is late. And if we're completely honest, most of the time we feel that way is because we just don't like to wait. In the waiting. We're typically in a hurry. We're typically in a rush. We want it now. We want to see what God is going to do right now. And I was listening to a podcast here a while back. Tim Elmore was doing this podcast, and he was talking about 5 truths about our world today. 5 truths about our world right now. And he said these things kind of define what's going on in our culture, but these things also are pitfalls for us, potential pitfalls, if we're not careful. And so here they are. And I want to mention these really quick because they really, I think, illustrate the point that we struggle in the wait, and we're always in a hurry. And the first word is this one. It's the word speed. This is like an acronym, and every one of these letters spell the word scene. These are scenes in our world today, S-C-E-N-E-S. This is the scene that we see playing out before us. He said the first thing that's going on is speed. We value speed. Getting things done fast and quickly and efficiently. We love the speed at which things are happening. High-speed internet access. I just had to kind of renegotiate with my provider this week, which is always incredibly frustrating for me and angering, if I'm being completely honest. But in the renegotiating, I was able to increase my speed, so that made me at least a little bit happy. And so, we want things faster, but here's the problem. If we think speed is good, then I may think slow is bad. Now that's the problem. If speed is good, I may think slow is bad. And yet some of the greatest things happen slowly over time. Great marriages happen slowly over time as you grow to love one another. Great food is put together slowly. Not fast food, but slow. If you want a really good meal, there's a lot of tender, loving care that goes into it. Maturity. Our maturity happens over time. It doesn't happen quickly and hurried and fast. It's slow to develop. But in our culture, we think slow is bad. There's another word that he referred to, which was convenience. That's the C of scene. Convenience. We value convenience. I mean, every business knows that. We try to do everything we can to make it as convenient as possible for people in our world today. We value convenience, but here's the problem with that. If we think convenience is good, then we may think hard is bad. If convenience is good, hard is bad. If something is hard, well, then it's not worth pursuing. It's not worth doing. In fact, in grades K through 12, they found that one of the most common phrases that students are using right now is the phrase, it's too hard. It's too hard. And there's teachers out there who've been teaching for decades going, it's not too hard. You can do this. But the problem is they equate something that's hard with something that takes a long time. If it takes long, if it's not easy, then it's too hard. It is something that we're battling in our culture right now. Here's another word. It's the word entertainment. We value entertainment so much, we have it at our fingertips, and we constantly want to be entertained. But here's the problem. If entertainment is good, I may think boring is bad. I may think boring is bad. I mean, how many of you had kids who were like, I'm bored? You know, like it's the worst thing on the planet Earth for them to be bored. When neuroscientists say, actually, boredom is good. Boredom is healthy. We need times when we are bored because it's in boredom where you create the margin and the space to be creative. That's when creativity begins. That's when reflection and introspection happens. But we just want to stay busy all the time, and we want to have earbuds in all the time. We want to be listening all the time. We don't make time for creativity. We don't make time for introspection. We don't do that because, entertainment's good, but boring is bad. But if we don't value boredom, we may miss out on some things. Another word was nurture. That in our culture, it can definitely be defined by nurture. Nurturing, in other words, safety obsessed, helmets and pads and belts and everything else, nurture. But here's the problem. If I think nurture is good, I may think risk is bad. And what's interesting to me about this is 72% of high school students say they want to be entrepreneurs. They want to go out and do something and initiate and create. But the problem is many of them will never do that because nurture's good and risk is bad. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, that takes some risk. And it takes risk to do something that is appropriate and good. So they're risk averse. And therefore, they just value nurture over it. Another word that defines our culture right now is this word entitlement. Entitlement. Where in today's world, we believe that we are entitled to certain benefits and perks, and it should just kind of come our way. But here's the pitfall. If I think entitlement is good, then I may think labor is bad. If entitlement's good, then having to work so hard for something is bad. It shouldn't be this hard, we think. This is something that should be a benefit, that should come my way. This is something I should have. So here's the point that Tim Elmore was making in that podcast. He was saying, look, if to us in our culture today, we think slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor is bad. If we think that, then we're going to miss the very components that grow us into good workers, into good leaders, into being good husbands or good fathers. In other words, if we're not careful, our world of 21st century technology where we value speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture, and entitlement could undermine the very elements that naturally build life skills in us. When you go through difficulty, hardship, labor, all those things, that's what matures us, grows us, builds life skills in us. And before, the people over like 75 or 80 say, amen, it's the 21st century technology that's ruining our kids. Before we get into that kind of talk, which is typically what we do, we like to apply sermons to everybody else and not to ourselves. Let me remind you that this problem is not just a 21st century problem. We happen to live in this one, but this problem was from the very beginning. And that's what I want to show you this morning. I want us to look at this. I want to talk about this, where in the very beginning, we had a problem with hurry. We had an issue with this. And that's why today we're beginning a brand new series, and it's called Between Two Trees. And this series is based out of this. We got the idea from this book by Shane Wood entitled Between Two Trees. And this book is really written about the two trees being the tree of life as we see it in the Garden of Eden in the beginning in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, and the tree of life as we see it in Revelation 22 for the healing of the nations, the tree of life when all of paradise is restored, and that life is lived between these two trees where it's hard and it's difficult and it's demanding. But it's between these two trees that we find the true tree of life, the cross, where we find our healing and our help and our redemption and our reconciliation. That it's from the cross that we can be transformed to be like Christ, which is our goal between the two trees. And so it's a book about transformation, being transformed from death to life. And so we're using this book as a tool. We're using it as a tool in our sermons. We're using it as a tool in our small groups. And we have it available for you to purchase. And I would encourage you to read this book. And so the publisher worked with us, gave us a great price, so we can sell it to you for $8 out in our lobby. We had 120 copies when we started today. I don't know how many we have now. But if we have more, I want to encourage you to get that book and read it. And because it's going to be powerful for us. I'm excited that Shane is also going to come and actually preach 2 messages for us. He's going to preach it on the last Sunday of September and the first Sunday of October. He'll be here. Even on those days, he's also going to do a seminar on Revelation in the afternoons, 2-hour seminars on both those days that I think will be powerful. And so it's going to be a treat for us to have him here. And I'm excited about what this series is going to do and its impact in our church. And in this book, Between Two Trees, Shane asks this question. And that's what I want to look at today. He asks the question, what was the serpent's tool of temptation in Genesis chapter 3? He's like, what was it that Satan used for deception that would cause humanity to eat of that forbidden fruit? I mean, what was it that Satan used as his tool? Was it power? Was it arrogance? Was it greed? Was it lust? I mean, what was it that led Adam and Eve, who had everything? They had everything they could possibly want. They were in paradise. They were in the presence of God. They were made in God's image. They had God's blessing. They had God's attention. He talked with them. He walked with them. He gave good gifts to them. He looked out for them. He cared for them. They had God's provision. They had trees with good fruit all around them, all the trees that they could eat from except for just that one. So he gave them so much. He gave them not only provision, he gave them sovereignty over animals, sovereignty over plant life. So what was it that was so alluring to Adam and Eve to cause them in that kind of environment to sin? And he quotes an early church father, Irenaeus, who offered this answer. This was the answer that he gave. This was the sin. The first sin was haste. The first sin was haste. I want something, I desire something, and I want it now. And he says, notice that in the garden, God didn't say you can never eat of the tree. He didn't say you can never, because it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, is it bad to know good and evil? I mean, is that necessarily inherently wrong? It wasn't like God said you can never eat of it. He definitely said you can't eat of it now. You can't eat of it right now. And not now is an appropriate response, an appropriate answer. I mean, how many parents have used that word over and over again to our kids? Not now. Not now. Over and over. My son, he's 15 now, but when he was 14, he kept wanting to drive. You know, we go down the road, hey, Dad, you might can pull over and let me drive? And I'm like, no. You know, when you're 15 and you've done the hard work and you got your permit, you get to drive. And so, but not now. That's my answer. Not like he never could, but just not now. It's like when our kids wanted to, do it myself and they had a knife at the table and you're like, you can't use knives. Not now. Not maybe someday, but not now. It's kind of like what Shane, he tells a story of his oldest son who he had learned a word just like kids do, where they pick up words and then they, it's usually words you don't really want them necessarily using or saying, and then he started using it all the time. But it was the word stupid. And so he was just this little kid, and he kept using the word stupid. And Shane was like, it wasn't appropriate, and it wasn't in the right context. And we kind of were concerned for his little heart, being able to handle that word in the right way. And so they told him, you cannot use the word stupid. That's a word you can't use. So then suddenly his son kind of became, the stupid police, where anytime someone said stupid, he was telling him, that's a bad word and you can't say that. And he started calling it the S word, all this stuff. They're using the S word, and what word are they using? The stupid. And so he just became the stupid police. And Shane's just like, we finally had to tell him, look, everybody else can use the word stupid, just you can't. You can't use the word stupid until you can handle it. Maybe someday when you know how to use it in the right context, in the right heart, maybe you can use it, but not now. I mean, we've used not now over and over again. And God was doing this very same thing. He was saying, not now, not today. He was saying no. But Satan was using haste, which is so intoxicating. It's so intriguing to have it now. He used haste as that very thing to lead them to sin. And what I want to talk about today, it's one of the reasons why we just stepped right into the message early on, is I want to talk about the problem of haste, so that once we see the problem, maybe we can slow down a little bit today. See, here's the problem of haste. The problem of haste is it produces unhealthy results. Haste actually produces something. Haste is productive. It's just unhealthy in its production. It produces unhealthy results. It's kind of like cancer in that way. We have cancer cells in our body, and they aren't necessarily a problem. The problem is when they start to grow too fast and quick. Haste produces unhealthiness. Haste does that in our own lives. Haste produces selfishness and immediate gratification and instant results and rushed processes, which short circuits our maturity. It short circuits our discipline and our self-control and learning obedience. It skips all of these essential steps that we have to go through in order to become mature and to grow. And it's probably happening, it's likely happening right now at this very instance for many of you, because haste is one of those things that comes to us even when we don't want it to. It just shows up. We give in to haste even without realizing it. It's like on a Saturday morning when everything's lazy and calm. And I remember when we used to have little toddlers and they'd be putting on their shoe, and I'm like, hurry, and we're not even going anywhere. But just haste shows up in our lives, and we constantly feel like we're in a hurry. Some of you, it probably even happened to some of you. There's a good chance some of you actually backed into your parking spot. You probably didn't even really need to. I mean, 11:30, it's not like it's the biggest service of the day, but you backed in. Why? So you can just pull right on out. You don't have to, worry about backing out and doing all that stuff. You probably just pull. Some of you, maybe you pulled in and you pulled all the way through because you're already thinking about the next step. It's just how we think. Some of you right now, maybe you started taking notes today. Maybe a few of you are note takers and you started to take notes, and you already have notes made of what you're going to bring to the picnic, and grocery list is already forming right now. Why? Because this is how we operate. We're constantly rushing to the next thing. We're not settling in our thoughts. We're just in a hurry. It's how we live our lives. It's just what we do. We're drawn into haste even without realizing it. We just do this. And that's one of the reasons why when you came in this morning, you may not have come in with a heart that was ready to worship, with a heart that was ready to focus on God. You were just racing. Your thoughts were scattered. And maybe we sang one song to start this service, and already you're like, man, I don't even know what I was thinking about when we were singing, but it wasn't God. And so we want to give an opportunity right now for you just to slow your racing thoughts. We want to give you an opportunity right now just to fix your thoughts and your eyes on Jesus, where you can think on Him. We want to give you a chance just to slow down and in this moment not to rush what God wants to do in your heart and in your life. And so I just want to invite you just to stand to your feet right now. Let's just stand to our feet. And let's just right now offer our hearts to the Lord. And let's offer our mind to the Lord so we're thinking about what He's thinking. Our thoughts are on Him. Let's still our spirits. Let's calm our hearts. Let's rest in His presence. Let's give Him praise, glory, honor. Not in haste, but in thoughtful reflection. Let's sing together.
Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. No, you've never failed. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. No, you've never failed. Let's declare what we have seen and heard. We've seen our God move. I've seen you move. You move the mountains. I believe. I see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way. And I believe. I see you do it again. You move the mountains, and I believe. I see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way. I believe. I see you do it again. I've seen you move. You move the mountains, and I believe. I see you do it again. Made a way where there was no way. I believe. I see you do it again. I see you do it again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. Never failed me yet. I never will forget. 'Cause you've never failed me yet. I never
there is a powerful truth in those words that we just sang. I mean, to think upon a phrase that we just sang that says, waiting for change to come. When you're waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, waiting. It can be hard when you're waiting to see God working. It can be hard when you're waiting to see that this is going to end well, that when you're in the waiting, that God is using it. And He's producing good fruit, and He's doing good work, even when it's under the surface, even when it's under the soil, so you can't see it there. It reminds me of a story that Shane tells in his book, and I asked him if he would just video himself on his phone, just telling this story to you of what he learned about God through a project that he began to embrace. And so just give your attention to the screen so you can listen to his story.
In my backyard, we host a community garden. And I've never learned so much about God than when I started to try and garden. I mean, I'll never forget the first Saturday that we decided to tackle the garden, kind of like we're having like weapons of war. We had our shovels and the hose and all kinds of different things in order to try to get the ground to produce fruit. And my job was this 6-foot by 12-foot plot that we were going to use to plant melons and things like that, even some corn. And so I began with my shovel. We didn't have an electric tiller. I began digging, turning over the ground, trying to get it to be pure, to discover where the rocks are and to remove the rocks. And after I got about 75% of the way done, my back was hurting, my fingers were blistered, I was broken into just a messy sweat. And then, after we finally finished, then came this interesting moment where we actually took compost and then spread it out over the top of the soil. And I don't know if you know what compost is, but compost is decomposed things like bananas and even cardboard, and it's in the decomposition, the death of these things, that it produces nutrient-enriched soil. And you take this mess of death and you spread it out over the ground, and it allows it, once you put the seeds inside of it, it allows it to produce fruit more richly. So we did the compost thing, then we planted each of our seeds, and each of the seeds is even a little bit different to plant. Sometimes you have to build it up, sometimes you have to actually spread it out. And then it went into a phase that was overwhelming. It was a lot of watering and waiting, and it was so incredibly boring until one day my wife and I were out, and I got a text on our phone from our neighbor, and in this mass of dirt out of the middle was this greenish yellow little sprout. And I remember like, oh my gosh, like this is unbelievable. Like we did it, did we? Because I don't feel like I've done anything in a long time. It was this moment of mystery where something had been produced, and I knew I was a part of it, but I also knew that I had very little to do with it. Then came all kinds of sprouts. And I remember just feeling this deep pride for each sprout that was coming out of the ground. One day I was actually sitting at our kitchen table, and I was eating when all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a rabbit bouncing by the window, heading straight for the garden. So I jumped up from my seat. I went rushing out the door, and I'm it's bummed that I have to say this, but it's true. I was hissing like a snake. I was hissing at the rabbit. And of course, the rabbit shot off, but I'm sitting there thinking, you gotta be kidding me. We finally got all of these sprouts to grow, and now I have to start thinking about the things that are gonna steal the fruit. So we started going through a whole new process of building trenches, of trying to figure out where to place the boards and some strategically placed rocks, and researching all kinds of ways to keep out all the little vermin, because if it wasn't for the rabbits, we had at times some raccoons. We even had these little bug caterpillar things that we couldn't really see, but you knew they were there because they were eating our fruit. I tell you what, that gardening was exhausting. But what I began to realize is that that's not just gardening, that's transformation. Transformation is filled with incredible amounts of pain, incredible amounts of toil, where you actually have to engage in repurposed death to bring life. And it is a ton of patience because you're watering and waiting, and then God divinely causes sprouts to come up in your life and your heart. Yes, you are a part of it, but it's something that He does. But it is a birth through pain, and I'm telling you, enemies come, and the enemies try to steal your fruit. And you have to get strategic with your community and with the Holy Spirit to find ways to fend off the enemy trying to steal the fruit you've earned. But I'm telling you this, transformation comes no other way. As a matter of fact, next time that you eat a piece of fruit from Walmart or maybe from your own garden, just remember, there's a lot more truth inside of that fruit than there is in the local news section. Love you guys. Hope to see you soon.
I appreciate Shane just sharing that when you're waiting for change to come in your life, that's what transformation is. It is a process. There's an enemy that's out to steal the fruit that's being produced. It is hard work, and it takes effort, and it takes time, and there's waiting involved, and God is working to produce things in your life that over time, it doesn't happen overnight. In fact, the Bible says with ever-increasing glory, we're becoming more and more like Jesus. We're being transformed into His image. That takes time from now until He returns. That's going to be a long journey, which means haste, that thing of, I got to have it now. It has to happen right now. I've got to reach the end now, is the enemy of transformation. In fact, that's the second point I want to make. Haste is the enemy of transformation. When we say it has to happen now, then we are entering into a dangerous place because we're doing exactly what Adam and Eve did. In fact, there is a defining moment in the ministry of Jesus that happens after His baptism. He goes into the wilderness, and Jesus is tempted he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And after His time of fasting, when He is praying, fasting, He is physically wiped out and fatigued, but spiritually charged. In that moment, Satan comes to tempt Him. When He's at his weakest moment physically, Satan enters in and tries to use the very same method of temptation that he used for Adam and Eve. He tries to take the very same approach, and he employs everything he has to try to get Jesus to use haste. And here is the moment, this critical moment. It's right here, found in Matthew 4, verses 8 through 9. Here's what we read. It says, "Again, the devil took Jesus to a very high mountain, and He showed Him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you," He said, "right now." Haste, right now, immediately, "if you will bow down and worship me." Satan uses that same temptation to Jesus. You can have it all right now. Oh yeah, maybe your father is going to give you the kingdom in one day, but right now I'm the prince of the air. I'm the one that tempted mankind and caused the fall to occur. Right now, I'm reigning and ruling on this earth. And Jesus, He's telling him, you can have all of this. You can have all of these kingdoms if you would just bow down and worship. You can have it now. That means, Jesus, you could escape all of the hardship and the pain and the torture and the suffering that's to come. Jesus, you don't need to go through betrayal and denial and the cross. You don't need that. You don't have to continue to be a man, humbling yourself, going from all the way glory to becoming a man on earth and limiting yourself. That you don't have to do that anymore. There could be no more sacrifice, no more self-sacrifice, no more persecution, no more insults, no more betrayals. None of it, Jesus, if you would just bow down and worship me now. And Jesus' response is this. He said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve Him only." Worship the Lord your God and serve Him only. No matter if you're in the wait, no matter if you're about to enter into suffering, no matter what you have to endure, no matter how long it takes, you serve Him only. And then the devil left him, and angels came and attended to him. God showed care to him. The Bible makes it very clear that Jesus had to suffer. He had to go through life here on earth. It was essential. There was no shortcut to salvation. There was no short-circuiting the process of redemption for us. There was no way of skipping obedience and faithfulness and sacrifice and and service. Jesus knew haste is the enemy of transformation. And so Jesus knew he had to endure in order to lead to something productive, something beautiful. In fact, he did, and Hebrews describes it. Hebrews chapter 5, verses 8 through 9 says, Son, though he was the Son of God, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. The writer of Hebrews is saying that Jesus was made perfect. He was the perfect sacrifice because he didn't short-circuit the process. He didn't, in haste, abandon the plan of God. He was the perfect sacrifice because he was sinless, because he endured. He allowed the fruit of maturity to take place in his own life, that from his obedience, from what he suffered, he was made perfect, and he became the source of eternal salvation. What we're finding out there in that moment is that we don't want to short-circuit the work of God in our life. There's value in the process. There's value in the journey. We just often don't see it. You see, haste wishes away the journey to simply get to the end. We just want to get to the end. We don't want the journey on the way to get there. We don't want the difficulty, the hardship, the struggle, the pain. We don't want to have to face ourselves and our own weaknesses and limitations and all the things that frustrate us about ourselves. We want to get there immediately, and God is telling us today, you can't short-circuit that process in your life. If you want good fruit produced in your life, haste will undermine it. So don't grow weary, don't grow tired, don't give up. Galatians 6:9 tells us, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. There's something productive, there's something you will reap if you continue in your faith. This text from Hebrews tells us this, that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, rather painful. Later on, however, it produces discipline, hardship. It actually is productive. It produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Scripture tells us over and over again, the difficulty, the hardship that you're going through right now is actually productive if you allow God to work in you in the process. If you would allow God to enter in and be obedient to him and submit yourself to him, he will work in you through the process and bring out a beautiful result. He will bring beautiful fruit in your life. If you would trust him for the journey and not just want to jump to the end. If you would trust him for your journey, there is value in that journey. Don't rush it. See the value in the wait. Wait on God. Continue to obey God. Continue to follow God, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it seems like he's not answering, even when there's labor involved and difficulty involved. Let's learn to wait. And so this morning, we were able to still our spirits before God and just rest in his presence and fix our thoughts on him. But I want us to do something else that I think could even be a way to apply what we're talking about right here in this very moment of waiting, where I want to encourage us right now to wait on one another. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to ask that our servers be dismissed for our time of communion that's coming right now. And the way we're going to do this a little different is we're going to wait to partake of these emblems of communion. Communion is where we remember the death of Jesus, his body that was broken for us, and remember the blood of Jesus that was shed for us by drinking the cup, the fruit of the vine. And I want us to do something right now where we wait on one another as we partake of this. There's something that Andy Stanley has done in his family as his kids were growing up that I know Corey and Leah Scott have tried to incorporate into their family at times, where when a meal has been prepared, in this case, if Leah, Corey's wife, has actually prepared a meal for the family or is still working to get things together or whatever, when it comes time to eat and the kids are called to the table, they will stand at their chairs, behind their chairs at the table, waiting for Leah to come to the table, and they don't sit down until she sits down. It's a way of showing honor. It's a way to show that we're going to wait on one another. This was something that Paul in the early church had to kind of get onto the church for, because the church wasn't waiting on one another, especially as related to communion. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 20 when Paul says, so then when you come together, he's rebuking the church there in Corinth. He says, when you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat. For when you're eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? So then, my brothers and sisters, when you gather to eat, you should all eat together. And they were eating meals together, and in that meal, just as Jesus was having his meal with his disciples, they would take bread and break it, representing the broken body of Jesus, and eat of it. They would take a cup, the fruit of the vine, and drink of it to remember his blood shed for them. And Paul's saying, you're not even waiting on one another. You're not even slowing down enough to care for each other's hearts, care for each other's bodies. You're not even slowing down enough to remember the sacrifice that Jesus made. And so this morning, in the spirit of removing haste, which is so intoxicating from our life, we just want to slow down. And let's wait on one another. So we're going to sing. And as we sing, the communion is going to be passed. And when you take that bread, take it and hold it. And then take the cup and just hold on to it. If you're a believer in Jesus and you can participate today by remembering Jesus' sacrifice, we want you just to hold it. And then I'll come back up and lead us in a time when we'll all partake together. So wait on one another. Let's sing together.